Hi, I'm celebrating a birthday today. Oh, not mine, hers. This is Jane. She just turned 80 years old. In her day, the fashions were stunning and iconic, and she could sew every one of them. So how am I celebrating the birthday of a 1940s fashion icon? I made a hat. So today, I'm going to show you how I made this hat on this machine with this pattern and an accessory from my Singer puzzle box. But before we begin sewing, introductions are in order. Let me tell you a little bit about Jane. Jane is a Singer Model 128. She rolled off the production line in 1941. In her day, she was a treasure, with a new style black crinkle finish, nickel and black side parts and attachments, elegant bedwood case, and all of the modern bells and whistles that 1940s dressmakers, tailors, seamstresses, and seamsters desired. Unlike modern machines, Jane does one thing, a forward lock stitch, but she does it wonderfully well. Combine that simple lock stitch with accessories and she can sew almost anything a home sewer would want to make. I purchased Jane a couple of months ago. She was dusty, but otherwise in excellent shape. I've not done a full restoration yet, but she is in sewing condition. Rewiring electric motors isn't in my skill set, so I have removed the motor, light, and foot pedal and installed a period-appropriate hand crank. The stitch length knob is still stuck in the long basting stitch position. It might loosen up as I use the machine, but if it doesn't, I'll remove that bobbin winder and use some pliers very gently to turn that knob. For clothing, the long stitch length would be a problem, but you can get away with using long stitches on a hat. The Singer Model 128 features a bullet-shaped vibrating shuttle, which doesn't really vibrate, it swings, and a long bobbin. Low shank accessories and various attachments can be attached to the presser bar and the machine bed. Used together, these machines will hem, ruffle, tuck, quilt, bind, and braid to your heart's content. Singer recommended oiling these machines regularly, so there are little access panels and holes all over where small drops of oil could be applied. This hole near the shuttle is meant to hold a felt wick that keeps a steady amount of oil at the point where the shuttle lightly touches the underside of the needle area. New owners of old machines will make the common mistake of removing the wick, thinking it is old dirty lint. But that wig is important. Definitely replace it if it's missing. Jane's bentwood case looks a little worse for wear, but since these cases were so solidly built, the structure is sound and it just needs some light refinishing. The Singer decal is still there and will be more visible once the wood has been cleaned and waxed. The bobbin winder makes contact with the wheel via a small rubber tire. The long, narrow bobbins hold quite a lot of thread, not as much as a modern rotary bobbin, but somewhere around 75%. At the beginning of a project, I usually load up 2 or 3 bobbins, so I can change them out quickly as they run out. I love watching the bobbins wind. Isn't it mesmerizing? Now let's get to work on that hat. For this project, I am using some white linen scraps and Butterick 6741. This pattern has 2 options for the hat, a super wide brim and a regular wide brim. There are 3 options for the bow. Of course, the first thing you do is choose a pattern size. I'm making a large. I like my hats to be a little big so they don't pinch my head or squish my hair. Let's get started. Inside the envelope, we have the pattern instruction and folded sheets of tissue with the pieces printed on them. The instructions show the line drawings for what's included in the pattern. Both hats have the same top and crown. The main difference is the size of the brim. There are 3 options for bows. There's a standard ribbon bow and 2 more elaborate ribbon flowers. I am making the smaller brim version, hat A, and this tells me that I will need pattern pieces 1, 2, 3, and 5. So here we have our pattern tissue, factory folded. Let's start cutting. I have all of my pieces cut out and ready to lay on the fabric. But first, it's a good idea to pay close attention to all of that helpful information that is printed on the pattern pieces. Arrows that indicate where you should cut on the grain line or on the bias are very important when you need fabric pieces to stretch, mold, or on a curve. Checking the pattern pieces for details about how many of each piece you need to cut is very helpful too, as it is different for different pieces. Piece number 1, the crown, needs the same piece cut out of the main fabric, 1 cut from the lining fabric, and 1 cut from interfacing. It also reminds us to cut these pieces on the fold. Since I am using scraps for the main fabric of this hat, I dug into my stash for the rest. This is sew-in non-fusible interfacing that will give the hat structure. This is a cream-colored quilting cotton. I know that it breathes because I've been using it for cotton masks. A neutral lining is a good choice for hats. It will not be visible when worn, especially if the hat gets wet in the rain. And this is a brightly colored quilting cotton that I like a lot because it reminds me of the geometric ball at the entrance to Epcot at Disney World. I can easily get the outer layer of the brim from this one large piece, as well as the top. The crown is supposed to be cut on the fold. I can get almost half the length of the crown from this one piece and puzzle together the rest from these smaller scraps. As long as I cut on the grain, it'll be okay. Let's start cutting fabric. How about some music? Okay, let's start piecing the rest of the crown. A hand crank sewing machine is much faster than hand stitching, but very slow in comparison to a motorized machine. But it makes a gorgeous sound, doesn't it? Let's speed things up. Now that I've pieced together enough for the crown, I need to adjust the layout. It's going to look weird if one side is solid linen and the other is seamed. So I'm making the vertical seams a design feature. If I add vertical seams to the solid side and place the fold line between seams, it will look balanced and I hope planned. This looks like it'll work. I have the cut-on fold line in the middle between vertical seams and the rest of the sections are approximately equal. Time to cut this out. Okay, these are the last little scraps that I need to stitch together for the binding that will go around the edge of the hat brim. One problem, the binding is supposed to be cut on the bias, and all of these are cut on the grain line. To fix this problem, I cut out 12 small diamond-shaped pieces that I will seam together and top stitch. It should give the binding the right amount of stretch, and hopefully it will look like another design detail. Now that everything is cut out, it's time to start sewing this hat. Easy enough. Let's keep going. Vintage and antique machines don't have those handy little lines that help you measure your seam allowance as you sew. Usually I just eyeball it, but the edge of this hat brim needs a little more precision, so I'm using a handy little accessory from my puzzle box. It's a seam guide that attaches to the machine bed. The little holes near the slide plates are threaded and are used for accessories and for oiling the machine. The first couple of times you use them for attachments, they are often clogged with old sewing machine oil and need a little patience to clear the threads. Use a small roller to adjust the seam guide for the width you want and gently screw the guide into place. The thumb screw really only needs to be tightened enough to keep it in place. Overdoing it may scratch or damage the slide plate. Whoa, this is where the train comes off the tracks. I pinned and repinned this last step 6 times. The only way I could get the brim to fit the crown was to gather the last couple of inches in the back. Here's why. Attaching the brim to the crown seems to reveal a possible drafting issue with this pattern. The crown is way too big for the brim. Did I do something wrong? Did the linen stretch? What happened? The linen is basted to stiff interfacing. It did not stretch. I adjusted my seam allowances equally, so that's not the problem. I don't usually blame the pattern drafting, but there are some issues here. If you compare the brim and crown pieces, you'll find they don't meet up. It's hard to see with curves. So I walked the crown piece along the brim, and sure enough, the crown piece is much larger. Gathering the back couple of inches worked okay-ish. Turning the hat right side out, you just see a little bit of puckering at the very back seam, and I can probably cover that up with a ribbon band. Problem solved. Let's move on. Compared to the previous step, the lining was a breeze. A little machine sewing, a little pressing, a little hand sewing. For the lining, I adjusted the size of the crown to better fit the top and the brim. The instructions recommend turning the hat inside out, pinning on the lining, and slip stitching the seam between the crown and brim. This hat is looking very pretty. I really like the contrasting fabric on the underside of the brim. All I have left is the binding. I pinned the binding right sides together to the outside edge of the brim and machine stitched it into place. Sorry, I couldn't find a good camera angle for this step. Too much hat and hands in the frame and not enough sewing machine. I don't usually sew over pins. I really don't like it when the needle strikes a pin just right and breaks. Way too much drama. With some of the tight curves I've done so far, I somehow convinced myself that this machine is such a gentle, sedate, graceful sewer that it wouldn't strike a pin. And the pins were really slowing me down. So I didn't take them out. And snap. Note to self and others, don't run over pins. They break needles and can knock your machine out of alignment. Slow down and take the pins out. Moving on, I folded, pressed, and pinned down the inside of the lining. Again, the instructions recommended slip stitching the inside binding into place. You could top stitch the binding by machine, but I like the clean lines you get by slip stitching. All those little pieces that came together to form the binding look really good, translating into diagonal lines around the finished brim. So the hat is basically finished. I just need a ribbon to go around the base of the crown. A simple white hat is very elegant, but this needs something extra. Something subtle to give it a pop of color and cover up the slight puckering from the gathers I had to make in the back, as well as maybe covering these mismatched seams. I like to keep my stash of fabric and notions at least somewhat organized. Okay, it's very organized. I pulled out my box of grosgrain ribbon and I think I have some options here. I keep the odds and ends of ribbon that cross my path, but I don't see anything in here that will work. This pink might work. This bright yellow picks up the colors in the geometric pattern and is the right width. This lighter yellow is a possibility. This would be pretty, but I'm saving it for a clothing project. This is more of an orangey yellow, another possibility. This orange is too orange, it might clash with clothing. I like this green, it would go with the summer colors you usually wear. I'm kind of liking this pale pink, but it might be too subtle. I think it's going to be one of these three. In the end, I decided the yellow ribbon was most likely to go with the rest of my summer clothing. It's bright and fun, and I really like this hat. It's very comfortable to wear, and I'll definitely make another one. Thank you so much for watching this video. This is the first of many. I have 9 other vintage and antique Singer sewing machines, and I'd love to share them with you. My next video will be an unboxing of a rare and kind of an oddball Singer sewing machine that I bought on eBay. I'm calling her Zelda. She's model 27, built in 1896 and then completely refurbished in the 1940s, and she is a hot mess. We'll talk about what she looked like when she was built and then what was involved in her makeover. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. More details about this hat, this machine, and my Singer puzzle box will be in the description below. And if you have an antique or vintage sewing machine in your life, I'd love to hear your story. Thanks for watching. See you next time.